Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife is acting strangely, and this leads to suspicions that she's. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. My father always had a way with words. At that moment, the doctor entered my room. "Good evening, Mr. Moore. How are you feeling?" he asked, looking at my chart. "Son, I need to go and make some more calls. I'll catch up with you later." My father began to leave the room. "Dad, I love you," I called out to him. "I love you too, son. Get some rest, and I'll see you soon," he replied. The doctor started again. "You are lucky, as I told your father and your wife. An inch more in either direction, and we would have had serious complications." "Sorry, doctor. Did you say my father and my wife?" "Your wife came with you in the ambulance, Steve. You probably don't remember, you were almost out of your mind." "My wife?" I repeated to myself. "I'll leave you alone for a couple of weeks while you piss off some local bandits. I think I'll get you a Kevlar vest for Christmas, so maybe I won't have to come down to the hospital in the middle of the night to check on you." "And you don't even want to hear what Cindy said." Jeremy smiled. "Well, now that we've got that out of the way, bro, how are you feeling?" "It's just wonderful now. At least I know what it's like to have a barbecue," I joked. We laughed, apologized to each other, and exchanged news. "So you got married? Does she know?" "Very funny, but I only know one girl who has the courage to do that." "I thought you two broke up." "We broke up, or so I thought. When she asked me to dance and I refused, she was offended. That's when her friend decided to cut me a little." "Well, you'll be out of here soon. Think about the story you'll tell your kids someday. And if you're lucky, you'll have a nice scar. Women love that. It'll be like, 'Oh, poor Steve,' right?" Jeremy stayed for another 20 minutes before mentioning something about dinner and needing to get some sleep before work tomorrow. Right before he left, he warned me about his next visit. "I'll bring Cindy with me tomorrow night. She says she has some tough words for you." God save me. "That's what I need, another woman coming at me," I said. I asked him to wait until I was out of here before bringing Cindy. I hope to be home by Wednesday evening, if, of course, I survived all these visits. The doctor returned straight from a not-so-successful lunch at the hospital, announcing that I was doing as well as could be expected and that I would see him tomorrow. I slept great Sunday night, better than I had slept in months. It was probably because of all the medication. I'm sure I visited a couple of times during the night, but I didn't notice. I woke up hungry, happy, and if it weren't for the stitches on my stomach, I would have happily taken a walk in the park. By Wednesday afternoon, I was home, bored and ready to go back to work. "Just don't overdo it," were the only instructions the doctor left me. I had my last follow-up appointment a week later, and then I was left to my own devices. On my first day back at work, there were cards and cookies on my desk. I was the center of attention for the first 2 hours. Once everyone's curiosity was satisfied, everything returned to normal, except for a few last-minute congratulations from colleagues who sometimes stopped by to see me. I left 3 emails and 2 calls to Regina to thank her for her help, but there was no response. When Cindy came in the next evening and lectured me for the umpteenth time, she said she had spoken to Regina. Regina regrets what happened and feels guilty. After your argument, she went back to her friends and basically told them what in 5th place you were to her. One of the guys she only met once took it as a sign that you didn't respect her and decided to teach you some manners, as he put it. Manners? She almost killed me. She has good friends, Steve. Regina said that even though she didn't know the guy, she still feels partly guilty. And I should, after all this? You don't understand anything, you're an idiot. She loves you, why? I have no idea. You got it out of pride. Maybe she didn't pay enough attention to you, but weren't you the one who told her to dance with all these guys? Why are you so upset about her dancing with them? Yes, but she let them touch her. That's not dancing, that's harassment. Have you talked to her about this? No, you just got angry and left. How is she supposed to know, with your short temper and hers too? You both need to learn to talk and not yell at each other. Steve, girls are smart, but we don't read thoughts. Call her and explain in a calm, quiet voice why you were angry. I know she will listen to you. I tried, but she won't pick up her phone or answer my emails. I think it's time to move on. What, the fourth, fifth, or maybe sixth time? When will you finally understand that one day you have to take a risk for someone? People aren't perfect, we all make mistakes, including you. If you want to be alone for the rest of your life, just keep walking away every time life challenges you or you start to feel uncomfortable. Take a chance, and maybe, just maybe, you won't be disappointed. Cindy, you may not have heard, but she's not answering her phone. Steve, you're not disabled, are you? And if I'm not mistaken, you still have a car and know where she lives. Pull yourself together and show that you have courage. I tried on Friday and Saturday without much success. At one moment, I thought she had picked up the phone, but a second later, I heard a familiar dial tone. I followed Cindy's advice. St. Paul Catholic Church holds 5 services on Sunday. I knew she wouldn't be at the 7 or 8 a.m. services because of Angela, which left me with 9:15, 10:30, and noon. I positioned myself on the steps of the church and waited. I didn't get anywhere at the 9:15 service, but I was lucky when I saw Regina and her whole family approaching the curb 10 minutes after 10. I thought through in my head what I wanted to say, but when I saw her, I forgot 90%. She saw me and looked at her family. It didn't look good. She didn't even say hello to me. She just walked past me and went into the church. I followed her, sitting on a bench 4 rows behind her. My family never went to Massachusetts Hell. Before I met Regina, I had only seen the interior of a church at weddings and funerals. When I walked with her, I did what everyone else did, stood up, knelt, and sat down when everyone else did. Today, the old woman next to me gave me a prayer book and showed me which page we were on. She smiled at me and went back to reading her chant. Even with my head down, I knew she saw me as she walked back down the aisle after receiving her prospera or whatever they were handing out at the altar. 15 minutes later, the service ended, and everyone began to leave the church. I lost track of her a couple of times because of the crowd, where everyone was talking to each other. I caught up with her when she was already halfway down the stairs. Regina, I called. She stopped. Damn, everyone stopped. Steve, what do you need? I just need to talk to you. Didn't you say enough last time? Please, just give me 10 minutes. That's all I ask, and after that, I'll leave you alone if you want. It was difficult to tell from her face what she was thinking. Her mother whispered something in her ear, then looked at me. Okay, I'm not going to discuss this in front of everyone, Regina said. I followed her to her car. Do you still remember where I live? I nodded. Yes, follow me, and we can talk there. I did as I was told, even though I didn't like the idea of having this conversation in front of the whole family. Mom, I'll be out in the backyard for a bit. Make sure Angela stays inside, okay? Is Steve staying for lunch? Regina looked at me. We'll decide soon, she replied. She left the house through the back door, and I followed her. We walked into the backyard, and while we wanted to believe we had gotten away from all the prying eyes, that sure as hell didn't happen. Okay, speak. You have 10 minutes, she said, with displeasure, crossing her arms over her chest. Sorry, I guess I'm taking up too much of your precious time, I said, turning to leave. I've been bossed around all my life, and I'm already tired of it. I guess we really don't have anything to talk about. Damn it, Steve, just talk to me. I don't understand what happened between us. Everything was fine, and then you suddenly disappeared. I spent the next 15 minutes explaining to Regina why I was so angry with her. You didn't say a word to me. Why? I tried, or at least tried to do it a couple of times. Didn't you see how angry I was that night? Damn, I was supposed to be beet red and steaming from my ears, but you just ignored me. Steve, I may have ignored you a little, but it was never intentional, believe me. The next time I saw you, I told you that I felt humiliated on the dance floor. I became the laughingstock of all your friends. I paid special attention to the last words. These guys were hugging you, and you didn't do anything to stop them. And when the music stopped, I saw your last partner kiss you, and then I lost my patience. You should have been with me, not with them. I was with you. No, Regina, you weren't. Cindy returned to the table half an hour later. After another half hour, I had to physically look for you, and you still didn't come back. If I wanted to be treated like crap, I would have stayed with one of my ex-girlfriends. I thought you were different. After this statement, there was deep silence, but I want to thank you for what you did that night. Without your skirt, I might have bled to death. This is where the tears began, hers, not mine. I'm sorry. Never in my life could I have imagined that he would do what he did. The only thing that came to my mind was to stop the bleeding. That's when I used my skirt. Someone poured beer on it, saying that alcohol would prevent infection. We looked at each other and laughed at this statement. After a few seconds, she continued, "Hey, what do I know?" Thinking back, it was a little chaotic, but it worked, didn't it? I guess I owe you a skirt. By the way, how did we end up married? I asked. From the moment we talked until they put me in the ambulance, they weren't going to let me in, so I just said we were married, she replied casually. One of the orderlies gave me a blanket to cover myself with, and we drove off. I didn't have the answers to all their questions, so I took out your wallet and gave them your medical records. Then I saw a card with a list of phone numbers and called your father. I met him at the entrance to the emergency room and told him everything I knew. You were already in surgery, so we just waited together. When the doctor came out and asked, "Mrs. Moore," your father and I looked at each other. He said you would be fine, but you needed to stay in the hospital for 2 or 3 days. After he left, your father and I talked a little. He told me to go home and that he would call me as soon as he saw you. But you never called back. I thought you just wanted to yell at me some more. I felt bad enough as it was. I'm sorry. I never meant to offend you. Now we were holding hands, looking at each other but not saying anything. Regina, honey, lunch is on the table, her mother shouted from the back door. Are you hungry? She asked. No, not for food, I replied, kissing her. We had lunch with her whole family. After lunch, we took Angela and went to the park. While Angela played, we set the rules for the future, no more quarrels, or rather, no more avoiding quarrels. If we have problems with each other, they must be resolved immediately. When we go out together, we are together unless we both agree to do otherwise. Dancing is one thing, but being touched and kissed on the dance floor is something else entirely. The next 2 points will be the most difficult for me. Steve, you need to trust me. If we have any chance of anything real, you have to trust that I always put your interests first and will never, I repeat, never cheat on you. But you have to promise to do it, because there's something about me that you might not like. I felt a little uneasy. You need to make peace with your father and your mother. You can see them together or separately, but it must be done. I couldn't believe she was asking me this. Hell no, no way in the world. I have no problems with my father. We've already talked, and everything is fine between us, but my mother is a completely different story. I don't even know where she lives now. It shouldn't be too hard to find out. You're smart, you know how to use a computer, and you still remember her last name. How hard can it be? What's the point? I haven't seen or spoken to her in years. I have absolutely no desire to see her again. These two made you who you are today, and you need to face, or rather, talk to, both. There are too many unresolved issues and open wounds. You are no longer that little 5-year-old boy, and you need to close this chapter of your life forever. Forgive them and move on with your life, which I hope will include Angela and me. She asked a lot, but I knew she was right. Regina didn't want to be there, but I insisted. For better or worse, if we were going to move forward together, I wanted her to meet the two people responsible for who I became. It took a week to arrange the meeting with my father and my mother. I wanted to see them together first. I didn't want to go through this more than once, and second, I didn't think anything could be resolved unless they also made peace with each other. He finally agreed, but only under his own conditions and only if it happened in his home. Something related to his home territory. My mother agreed almost immediately, something about how she wanted to see me again. So, on Saturday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we all gathered in my father's living room. The tension was palpable. My father rearranged the furniture in the living room so that everyone was sitting in a large circle around a large coffee table. This way, everyone could see everyone without being close enough to touch anyone. Before we started, I introduced Regina to my mother. My father already knew her, as he had met her that night in the hospital. I told them that it was my idea to have her here and that her presence and support were important to me. After the greetings, I began. I know this is hard for everyone, but it's long overdue. Everyone seemed busy with their drinks or shifting nervously in place. We may not love each other, but we all have a common denominator, me. Mom, Dad, I don't know what happened between you, and I don't care at this point, but your actions have left scars on a 5-year-old boy in ways that you can't even imagine. I turned to my father. Dad, telling me to get myself together and be a man may have worked for you, but I went from living in what I thought was a happy home to living with a tough father and an overprotective grandmother. The only thing you taught me was to stay on guard because there will always be someone who wants to deceive me. Until recently, I believed you, until I met someone who truly has my interests at heart. I squeezed Regina's hand, then turned to my mother. Mom, what you did to Daddy and me was unforgivable. You can't abandon your child. If you and Daddy had problems, it was your problem. I see that you thought the only way out was to leave, but the way you left broke my heart. You were my mother, you should have loved me and not left me. All those promises that we would be together again were like a teaser with candy that you gave to me and then took away. It got to the point where I felt like you didn't want to see me anymore. You were building your new life without my participation. How many years has it been since you last talked to me? 6? How many calls, cards, and missed birthdays? Why don't you care about me anymore? Or are you just ashamed that you let it drag on for so long? Tears flowed as my mother tried but couldn't find the words. I continued, no matter what, you are still my mother, and nothing can change that. But how present you will be in my life depends on what happens here today. You both need to understand one thing. I no longer need your support or approval. We're all getting older, and one day I'll get married and maybe have kids. I want you both to be a part of our lives, and I hope you want that too. This started a round of discussion for the next hour. The phrase "I'm sorry" was repeated constantly. My father spoke rather than shouted at my mother for the first time since she left us. They were never going to get back together or even be friends, but if they could at least remain civil to each other, I could live with it. For the first time, I learned that my mother had remarried and was happy but would give anything to have me back in her life. My father was still resentful and started bringing up old problems. I stopped him immediately. Dad, this is about us, or should I say, the three of us, not about you and Mom. If you want to fight again, please wait until Regina and I leave. Then you can destroy the house if you want. I took back control. When things quieted down again, I let Regina tell them a little about herself. She explained our volatile relationship, adding that she was committed to it. She told them that this discussion was important if the relationship was to truly blossom. In the 2 hours we spoke, problems were resolved and meetings were scheduled, especially during the holidays. Although complete peace was not established, at least the hatchet was not buried in someone's head this time. We all hugged, exhausted and emotionally drained but with smiles. We ended the meeting and returned to Regina's parents' house. She shared her feelings about what had just happened at my father's. Stephen Moore, I'm so proud of you. You are a strong, wonderful, caring man, and I'm so glad we're together. How happy are you? I said with a sly smile. Let's go. We don't have time for what you're thinking. Remember, you promised Angela that we'd take her shopping and eat out if she behaved. I'd rather her mother be a bad girl and be in my bed right now, I teased. She did not give in to the provocation. We'll have time for that, but later, she said. I pouted, even though I knew it wouldn't lead to anything. Regina's mom's eyes wanted to know everything as we walked through the front door, but she kept her mouth shut. I thought she and Regina would talk later. We picked up Angela, and within 5 minutes we were at the mall. Regina and I each picked out an outfit for Angela. Personally, I thought my choice suited her much better. I paid for both outfits and dinner at Pizza Hut. It had been a long day for all of us, and we were all pretty tired. After Regina put Angela to bed, we sat in her backyard, cuddling and secretly kissing when no one was looking. At 9 o'clock, after a very pleasant kiss, I decided it was time to go home. "I want to go to work at 7:15, so be here no later than 7:45, she announced, walking me to my car with one more kiss. I headed home for a well-deserved nap. "Where's Angela?" I asked the next morning. "She's going with my mom to Mass at 10:30. It'll be just the two of us this morning." Everyone knew each other. It was more like a social gathering outside a large Catholic church, with everyone updating each other on the week's events. I wasn't a regular participant, but I could tell that everyone knew who I was, probably knowing more about me than I would have liked. The same thing happened on the way out, saying goodbye to everyone and promising we'd see them next week, which took at least 15 minutes. With Regina next to me in the front seat, she announced that she wanted to stop at one of the local bakeries. She chose a couple of dishes that we both liked and bought each of us a cappuccino. "If you don't mind, I'd like to have breakfast at your apartment for a change." Am I against it? Of course not. I lived for the time when I could take her entirely into my own hands, which didn't happen often. It was nice to sip my coffee and enjoy the warmth of a beautiful summer Sunday morning. During the 10-minute drive to my house, I felt relaxed. Hand in hand, we entered my apartment. Hands, lips, and tongues greeted me when I turned around after closing the door. There were no discussions, no idle talk, or anything like that. Regina had her own plans for the morning, and it wasn't breakfast. I was just grateful that my bedroom wasn't as messy as usual. That morning, breakfast was delayed by about 2 hours. Do you know what it's like to hold a curvy woman in your arms? Wonderful. Full breasts, hips, a fifth place that could take a beating, and a mouth that made me forget every other lover I'd ever had. I expected this to happen sooner rather than later, but after yesterday, I thought we'd talk again this morning, working out the rest of our problems. I don't think there were any pressing issues to deal with this morning. Maybe it was my insecurities, but I wanted to prove to her that I was the best lover she had ever had. That was great. It felt really good, she said, licking my lips and then inhaling them. Good, great, I thought to myself, feeling that I had given my best effort and it was just good. I thought I had at least given it an excellent or maybe even a wonderful rating. It seemed to me that nice wasn't suitable now. My male ego took a hit, and I think Regina understood my dilemma. It was the most pleasant and tender lovemaking I had ever experienced. I need a shower, and so do you. We can't go back to my mom smelling like a knight, can we? She said. I don't know why not. Let's try it and see what happens. Let's see, an overprotective and extremely traditional Catholic family on one hand, and a guy they're just starting to trust who brings their daughter home from church smelling like he's been having an intimate all night. They know you're not a virgin. They probably realize you were at least a little involved in this, Steve said, thinking about it. Throwing it in their face are two completely different scenarios. If they don't see it, they don't worry about it. They trust their daughter. After eating breakfast, which, of course, whetted our appetite for more, we headed to Regina's house. I held the car door open for her. She sat down, adjusted her seatbelt, tousled her hair, and looked in the vanity mirror, putting on her lipstick. When I walked over and kissed her, just before starting the car, I began to complicate things even more. Without thinking twice, I casually declared, I love you. Just as casually, I started the car and began to pull out of the parking lot when she screamed, stop. She leaned over and turned off my car. What the hell did you just tell me? She asked. I unbuckled my seatbelt, extended my hand to a surprised Regina, kissed her on the lips, and told her again that I loved her. I restarted the car and drove away a second time. Steve, we need to talk about this. I know, but is now the right time or place? Well, my parents' house sure as hell isn't the place. Just answer me one question. Do you care about me? Yes, she began to say, but I stopped her. There are no buts. I care about you, you care about me, what else matters? Well, I can think of one person that immediately comes to mind, Regina said. You and Angela are one. I've known this from day one, and you didn't see me heading for the mountains, did you? There will probably be many problems, but together we will solve them one at a time. If we love each other, the rest is just unnecessary nonsense. She didn't quite agree with me because now she was somewhere up there in the clouds. We need to talk, but not at Mom's house. I still don't know where you want to put this, and your ideas and mine may not coincide. Well, we could turn around and head back to my place. Just a warning, once I get you back inside, I'll have other things on my mind. Just like a guy, give him a try and he'll want to make a sustainable diet out of it. We looked at each other and laughed. Just go. Mom is waiting for us for lunch. Lunch was good as always, and as always, they kept pushing food on me and then looked disappointed when I refused. How will you gain weight if you don't eat? Your skin and bones, her mother said, putting this or that on my plate. Regina couldn't take her eyes off me, especially when I was talking to her mother and then to her grandmother. Her eyes said that her family was watching. Want to give them a show they won't soon forget? I whispered in her ear. The look I received in response said, no way in the world. I kept my hands to myself. Regina's grandmother sat on my other side. She probably looked at least 80, but she could have been 90. I don't know for sure. She was active but thin and looked old. During dessert, she leaned towards me and pointed at my plate. Do you like it? She asked, referring to the dessert. Yes, very tasty, I said, trying to be especially polite. I prepared it, she replied, standing up proudly. This was followed by another statement. My granddaughter is a beautiful woman, isn't she? Yes, she is, I answered, turning to Regina, who was talking to someone on the other side of the table. Since you're sleeping together, isn't it time for you to get married? With these words, she stuffed the last spoonful of her dessert into her mouth. I almost choked, grabbing my tea to wash down what was left in my mouth. My thoughts were racing. How could she know? Hell, we just did this for the first time this morning. What is she, a witch? As Grandma swallowed the remainder in her mouth, she continued, the way you look at each other reminds me of my late husband. He never got enough. This man could do this for hours. How I did anything at all when he was around is still a mystery to me. I looked at Regina and silently mouthed the word help, hoping she would understand my hint. Well, I hope it happens soon. I'm not getting any younger, you know, and I wouldn't want to die before then. With these words, she patted my hand. I was very happy when Regina came to my rescue. Grandma, I need to introduce Steve to Aunt Claire before she leaves. No problem, honey. Steve and I are just getting to know each other a little better. When my grandmother's gaze met mine, it said everything. You didn't tell anyone that we had a night before we came here, did you? Steve, do you think I'm crazy? I'm damn sure I don't have a devious wish, aren't you? Well, your grandmother said that since we were having an intim, I should make you an honest woman. This, along with a brief history of her night life with your grandfather. Damn, too much information. Regina was laughing into her hands. Now come on, laugh. You saw that I almost choked on the custard. Think how cute it would be if she fed me mouth to mouth. Ugh, the only one who will give you mouth to mouth is me. With a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, she kissed me hard. It was a little creepy, but every Sunday, my grandmother would not take her eyes off me, especially if I was with Angela or Regina. My conversations with Regina became more serious and included all topics, including Angela. Would I adopt her if we got married? Would I become a Catholic? Where would we live? How many children did I want? She wanted answers to all these questions, but sometimes I didn't have them. Things were moving fast, and it scared the hell out of me. We often met with Jeremy and his wife Cindy. Last year, they took the plunge and were wondering why I was delaying. My family is closer than it has been in years. I made it a point to talk to my father and mother weekly. We worked on a relationship, but sometimes it felt like pulling teeth. It was difficult to regain so much lost time in a few months, but I was going to shake things up again. This happened on Sunday, the 14th of March. Regina and I were as compatible as anyone I've ever met. The work was going great, and for once, I was happy with my life. The lease was expiring on the 1st of May, and I had already told them that I was not going to renew. Instead of replacing my 10-year-old car, I rebuilt the engine and did a few other things so it would last another 100,000 miles. I had better things to do with my money. Often on Sundays, after church, there would be 20 to 25 people at her mother's house for lunch, and everyone brought something. Regina and I went to the bakery after church and bought 4 loaves of freshly baked Cuban bread. They were still warm when we put them in the back seat next to Angela. In the trunk of my car was a large cooler with ice and a few other items that I would need later. When we entered the house, Regina went to the kitchen, and I went to look for her grandmother. It was quite difficult, but luck was on my side because that Sunday she sat alone on the couch and watched what was happening. I walked over and sat down next to her. "Hi, Grandma. How are you feeling today?" She smiled and said that, except for a slight cough, she felt like she was 70 years old. "I need to show you something," I said, looking around for Regina and her mother. "This is something I bought for your granddaughter. I just want to know if you think she'll like it." I pulled the ring out of my top pocket and showed it to her. She didn't cry, didn't scream for joy, or anything else. She just looked at it, smiled, nodded her head, and kissed me on the cheek. Placing her wrinkled hand on mine, she said, she would really like it if it were the cigar ring you gave her. "So, have I received your blessing?" I asked. She didn't answer, only nodded again in approval. I kissed her forehead. My palms were sweaty, my heart was pounding. I had no appetite, but I managed to swallow a few bites. Regina sat on a bridge chair with a plate of food on her lap next to one of her aunts and her mother. They were all talking a mile a minute. I took one last sip of tea, relaxed my shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked forward. I knew that if I hesitated, I would chicken out. I already chickened out once. Regina saw me walking towards her and smiled at me. I loved this woman more than anyone ever. She was about to say something to me when I dropped to one knee in front of her. I had a big speech planned about how much I loved her and Angela, which would probably go on way too long. What happened was that I became a little tongue-tied and ended the conversation with, "Regina, I love you, and will you make me the happiest man on earth by agreeing to become my wife?" She didn't expect this, especially right here in her parents' living room with no one but her father and grandmother around. I was on my knees holding that damn ring and waited for what felt like an eternity until she burst into tears, threw her arms around my neck, and kissed me. Everyone went crazy. I had already done the right thing by asking Regina's father for her hand a week ago. When I walked in today, I handed him my car keys and told him that I had a cooler in the trunk with a few bottles of champagne that we might need later. He took the keys, shook my hand, and said, "Good luck, because you're going to need it." He was right. The pandemonium began when every woman in the room wanted to see the ring that was already on her finger, and Regina didn't let me go for the next hour. The women were all talking at once and loudly. When Angela entered the room to find out what was causing all the fuss, Regina grabbed her and told her she was going to have a new dad. I think it went in one ear and out the other, but I still got a hug from her. Looking at my grandmother, I saw her smile. It was a big day for her, too. Her father and brothers brought out the champagne, glasses were filled, toasts were made, and I was officially welcomed into the family. While the women began planning the wedding, her father, brothers, and the rest of the men took me to the backyard, where they got out strong drinks. I only lasted 3 rounds before I thought I was going to cough up a lung. They laughed and said I'd get used to it. This was the longest Sunday brunch I'd ever been to. By 7 o'clock in the evening, everything began to calm down. Everyone congratulated us again as they walked out the front door. I was planning to leave soon, so I drank a glass of cold iced tea. I had already had too much to drink earlier and didn't want to risk getting a DUI. I watched as Regina helped her mother and grandmother, still with a smile on her glowing face. When she came to me, the kiss she gave me almost knocked me off my feet. I thought now that we were engaged, she could show some affection in front of her family. "Why did you do this in front of my whole family?" she asked when we were alone. To top it off, she gave me another kiss. I thought about it for a long time. Considering how close your family is, I decided to include them in what I hoped would be one of the happiest moments of our lives together. It's like combining our 2 families. Well, it worked, and you sure impressed my parents, not to mention made a few guys in the room feel a little out of place. "You always know how to surprise me," she said. "I'm trying. By the way, what would you do if I said no?" "Well, I know a mature lady, and if she's half as good as her stories, she'd probably kill me on our honeymoon. I can guarantee you won't be able to walk when I'm done with you." "Isn't that what I'm supposed to be telling you?" We laughed. Night tension hung in the air. With Regina in my arms, I wanted to take her home and spend the next 2 hours showing her what we would do nonstop on our honeymoon. It seemed like her mother wasn't ready to let me go yet. First, she wanted to talk a little about the wedding. So, for the next hour, Regina, her mother, grandmother, and her 2 aunts discussed the wedding. This was not at all how I planned to end my proposal day. On Monday and Tuesday evenings, we went around telling everyone the good news. We first met with my father, who was not at all surprised, and then with Jeremy and Cindy, who both said it was about time. I couldn't tell if my mom was surprised or not, although she seemed genuinely happy for us. I felt something underlying, but I didn't care whether she liked it or not. It was already decided for us. When Regina asked when I wanted to get married, I said, the sooner, the better, because I needed to vacate my apartment by the end of April. We needed to find a new apartment and be ready to move in during the last week of April, so we didn't have much time. Location was the main issue. She still wanted to be close to her parents, and I wanted to be close to work. We had a conflict. In the end, I placed her work, my work, and her parents' house on a map and drew a circle around all 3. That's where we needed to look. Her neighbor's second cousin's friend had a 2-room apartment for rent. Apparently, marrying into a large extended family has its benefits. The place was spacious, clean, and I could live with a terrible view of the parking lot for the price he offered us. We signed a 1-year lease and were told we could move in any time after April 27th. After our first wedding meeting on the day of my proposal, I tried to stay away from wedding plans. "I'll be there, tuxedo or not, as long as there's something to eat and drink. I'll be happy." After all, this was the moment when the bride was supposed to shine. I thought they were joking when they said they had set the date for the first Saturday in May. I thought it would be impossible before June. Apparently, I underestimated the women of the Diaz family. 2 weeks in advance, the hall was booked, the food arranged, and the invitations ordered and already being printed. I asked my mom if she wanted to add anything besides her presence, but she left the wedding organization to my future wife's family. Not until our wedding night, I said a little too loudly when Regina told me her plan the following Saturday night. "Think how excited you'll be by then," she explained, now a little hesitantly. "Honey, you didn't say we couldn't do anything at all, right?" I could think of at least 10 things at that point. Later that evening, we quietly tried at least 3. I might survive until the wedding. I could go on and on about our wedding, but let me sum it up this way. When I saw my bride walking down the aisle with her parents, I knew at that moment that she was the most beautiful being on this blessed earth. I may be a little biased, but mere words cannot express how amazing she was, and she was soon to be mine. Secondly, there was enough food and drink to feed a small third-world country. Out of 128 guests, there were only 11 people on my side. On her side, there were 117. Most brought something to eat or drink. I had never been to a potluck wedding before, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time. Finally, my mother and Regina planned our honeymoon without telling me or giving me a chance to intervene. "Trust me," was all they said. It was nice as a wedding gift, but I wished I had some say in the matter. The worst part was that she didn't tell me anything more than that I would like it as much as her family. It was scary, well, maybe a little. "Honey, how can I pack my suitcase if I don't know where we're going?" I asked. "Pack for very warm and humid weather," she replied. It did not help, but you'll need your nice suit and dancing shoes. "Regina, I have a better idea. Why don't you and my mom pack for me? That way, I'll make sure I have the right things." I said this sarcastically, but apparently, she missed that part because the night before our wedding, the 2 largest suitcases I owned had tags with my name on them. I was in a quandary. It was almost midnight, and the wedding was still going on. As much as I was having fun, I already had other ideas on my mind. I snuck up behind my bride, kissed her neck, and told her that she made me the happiest person on earth. She looked at her watch, called out to her mother, and told me it was time to change. Change for what? I asked. For our honeymoon, silly, she replied. An hour later, the four of us were crammed into her father's Jeep with enough luggage for a trip around the world. With her mother and father in the front seat, Regina and I snuggled as close as possible in the back seat. When we arrived at the airport 45 minutes later, I had had enough. As we pulled up to the edge of the road at the Southwest Terminal, I decided it was time to demand answers. Stop! Wait! I won't take a step until you tell me where we're going, I said, raising my hand to stop the whirlwind of events around me. The three of them looked at each other. Finally, Regina answered my question. First stop, Puerto Rico. We have a little over an hour and a half before our plane leaves. Well, at least I knew we were heading south. Already in our seats, first class, no less, Regina handed me our itinerary for the next 7 days. We were treated to a 7-day cruise tour of the Southern Caribbean, starting in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Her extended family met us at the airport, where we were taken to someone's house just outside of town. English was spoken here from time to time, but the main language was Spanish. Introductions were made, and we were shown to a room where we could freshen up, get some rest, relax, or do whatever we wanted. The rest of the family would be coming around 11:30 in the morning for the party. Her cousin winked at us and closed the door. I turned to Regina with a big question mark on my face. The rest of the family? The party? My family here wants to throw us a wedding party? How big is your family? Call me a coward, but my body failed me. The hottest woman on the planet lay next to me on the bed, and I fell asleep on my wedding night. In my defense, it was 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, and I had been up for the last 24 hours celebrating my wedding and partying like there was no tomorrow. I was at my limit. There must have been 50 people at the party, first and second cousins, old friends, new friends, they were all there. More food and alcohol appeared again, placed on tables throughout the living room. This seemed to be enough to feed the entire island. After 3 hours of celebration, I began to silently pray that we would make it to the ship on time and sober. Everyone wanted to meet their new husband, and since Regina had been away for 10 years, there was a lot of socializing. At 5 o'clock, I told her it was time to pack all our things into the car and head to the port. I was looking forward to 7 days alone with my new wife. The cruise was full of activity. If you wanted to do something, there were 6 stops: St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and St. Martin. We were scheduled to return to San Juan on Sunday morning. We couldn't even go to dinner the first night at sea. We ate on the balcony of our cabin and reconnected with each other after the previous 2 days of non-stop action. Regina said she had packed a special surprise for me for each night of our cruise. If the rest of our nights were half as hot as Sunday, we probably wouldn't have made it to the cafeteria for any meals. By Tuesday, we needed a break. One of the legs of our bed broke, and the steward assured us that it would be replaced with a stronger one by evening. We walked slowly around the Virgin Islands and Barbados, buying a few souvenirs, although most of the stuff was geared toward tourists and didn't interest either of us. While we were getting dressed for dinner, I thought about skipping it again. Honey, do you want to skip dinner and order room service again? No way. I want to see something on this ship before we go back to San Juan on Sunday morning. Plus, I really want to check out the food in the mess hall. I gave in after the promise of a special surprise. When we returned to our cabin later that evening, our entire table watched as we took our seats and ordered a bottle of wine. We weren't sure if we'd even see you on this trip, said one of the middle-aged women. I understand you're on your honeymoon? Regina smiled and said they were replacing the bed in our cabin because we had somehow worn it out. I think I blushed when the whole table burst out laughing. The food was great, and the company was exciting. You should definitely go to the adult comedy show at midnight, one of the women told Regina. It's for adults only, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure I can keep my husband that long, but we'll try to make it in time. Make reservations for us tonight, okay? We walked around the ship after dinner, gambled a bit in the casino, and finally visited the dance clubs. I danced better than ever for an hour before I sat down to rest. While I was resting, Regina continued to move to the beat of the music. A guy came up and asked her to dance. She looked at me, and it didn't take her long to make a decision. She smiled at him but politely refused, showing her engagement ring. "You could dance with him," I whispered to her. "Been there, done that, and never again, especially on our honeymoon." I got off the chair and walked back onto the dance floor. The comedy club was packed, but we finally found our dinner companions. Most of them were already tipsy, and since no one was driving, they decided to enjoy themselves. The comedian was so funny that I almost stained my pants from laughing. When he started making fun of the people in the room, I sank a little deeper into my chair. "Where's that newlywed couple who broke the bed in their cabin and had to replace it?" he asked. Our dinner party pointed at us. "Looking at how hot your wife is, it's no surprise. If you get tired, I'm in room 1841. That's 1041. Everyone laughed, but it was good-natured laughter. Regina, not one to let anyone get the better of her, quickly answered him, "Well, if you have more than my husband's 12 inches, show me that, and then maybe we can work something out." "How about I give you 6 inches twice," was his quick reply. "To be half as good as my husband, you'd have to do this at least 4 times, she said. The audience burst into laughter again, but Regina added, "If you don't mind, we have another bed worth trying out." She took my hand. I was also told that no one had ever broken more than 2 beds on a 7-day cruise, but they had not yet met my husband. We came out to a standing ovation. "Honey, unless you're confusing me with someone else, I don't have 12 inches, I said. "I know and you know, but the other women on the ship don't," she replied, smiling. I received a lot of stares from many women for the rest of the cruise. I'm sorry to say we didn't break the record for broken beds. We tried our best, but it didn't happen. On Sunday morning, we returned to San Juan, and by 10:30, we were on the Big Bird flying home. It was an exhausting and memorable 7 days, to say the least. Thanks to these 7 new outfits, we were able to relive our wedding night over and over again. We slept most of the way back because we knew our new reality was waiting for us as soon as we got off the plane, and it was waiting for us. "Mom! Mom!" Angela screamed, running toward Regina. I received hugs and kisses, but 99% of her joy was directed toward her mother. On the way back to our apartment, we tried to fit 7 days into 45 minutes. Work started tomorrow, and we all went to bed early, knowing we would wake up to our new normal. Life was better than good. I was usually greeted at the door with kisses and hugs from both of my women. I tried to bring home something special for Angela every Friday night. It didn't have to be something big, she just knew it would be something. One time, I almost forgot. I pulled up to our house when I realized I had forgotten her little gift. I quickly went to the corner pill store and bought a small stuffed animal. "You know you're spoiling her, you'll never be able to keep this up all the time," she said. She was right, so from that Friday, I started giving Angela $1 for her piggy bank. Now she met me at the door holding her piggy bank. After a big kiss and hug, the $1 was placed in the pink piggy bank. I tried to diversify, sometimes coins, sometimes paper money, but the dollars were always there. The week before my business trip to another city, Regina seemed a little off. By that, I mean the honeymoon period seemed to be passing. She was still waiting for me, but something was wrong. Although we still made love almost every night, if I didn't know better, I would have thought she had something on her mind. I had to leave for almost 4 days. I called every night, and she said she missed me, but the underlying subtext was there. On the flight back, I slept as much as I could because I knew I probably wouldn't sleep the first night home. This was the first time we had been apart since our wedding 3 months ago. When I pulled into the driveway and opened the front door, there was nothing, no kisses, no hugs, nothing. "Honey, I'm in the kitchen," I heard her shout. She was stirring something on the stove. After drying my hands with a towel, I received my hug and kiss, a little later than expected. Maybe I expected too much. She was a little quiet, but Angela more than made up for it. "Regina, are you okay? Are you sick?" "I'm fine, just a little tired. I think I'll be back to normal by the weekend." She didn't return my concern. My wife spent a lot of time with her mother or on the phone with her. It might have been a little post-wedding blues, or maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but whatever it was getting worse. When she snapped at me on Friday night for giving Angela $2 instead of $1, I knew something was definitely wrong. When she replied that nothing had happened, I didn't believe her. That damn little voice in my head was talking to me again, and I didn't like it. On Saturday morning, Regina said she was going to church for confession. In all the years that I had known her, she had never gone to confession. Being such a Catholic, what could she possibly have to confess that was so bad? When she returned, I immediately noticed that she was crying. What she was hiding was tearing her apart and indirectly tearing me apart too. "Regina, honey, we need to talk today." "I know, and we'll talk when Angela goes to bed tonight." The inner voices became louder. Dinner was simple, but neither of us could eat much. After a little television, a quick bath, 2 chapters of her favorite book, and Angela was out, I found my bride in the living room waiting for me. "Do you want to start, or should I start asking questions?" I said, trying not to be confrontational. "Steve, you have to promise me that you won't get angry no matter what I say." "Regina, I don't know if I can promise that. It depends on what you're going to tell me. Please promise me." She was already crying. "Okay, I promise. No matter what you tell me, I won't get mad." "Steve, do you know how we discuss everything and make all the important decisions together? It was one of those agreements we both made before we got married." "Okay, so what haven't we decided together?" "Just remember it's not entirely my fault. It's just me that is. Damn it, Regina, spit it out." I spoke a little louder than I intended. "Steve, I'm pregnant. I know you wanted to wait until we moved into the house. I'm so sorry. How could this happen?" I was shocked, to say the least. "Sometime during our honeymoon, I think. But you took the pills, right? Did you miss a day or something?" "No, I checked. I started taking the pills 2 days before we left and made sure I took them every day. Before this, we used protections. Sometimes it was after we had a night or first thing in the morning." My gynecologist didn't have an answer either. She said maybe I should have started a month earlier to regulate my cycle, but even then, sometimes it just happens. Nothing is 100% foolproof. But no matter how it happened, we'll have a baby. Please don't hate me." She began to lose her composure again. "I told my mom and my priest, and both told me I shouldn't hide this from you. They were right. How can I be angry with the mother of my child?" "Honey, we're going to have a baby," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I'm so happy," she screamed with joy, jumped into my arms, and gave me a huge, salty kiss. Okay, I lied, but I'm not Catholic, so it doesn't matter. I was neither delighted nor completely miserable. I really wanted to wait until we got settled a little, but it happened, and I was ready to support her 100% no matter what. I thought she would tell everyone our news at Sunday Mass, but she didn't say anything, which surprised me. However, when we entered her parents' house, a real commotion began. When she confirmed to her mother that she had finally told me, non-stop joyful, excited shouts and screams became the norm that day. When all the women gathered together this time, planning for the arrival of the baby, the men expressed their condolences to me. They said I had no idea what would happen to me. They wished me luck because I would need it. Grandma was sitting alone on the side. I approached her with dessert for both of us. "Well, you've made it," I told her. "You saw your granddaughter getting married. Now if only I could live to see my new grandson or granddaughter." "You'll outlive us all, and you know it," she replied. "Just think of a couple of names." We decided we didn't want to know the baby's intimate until he or she was born. She smiled, stroked my hand, and kissed my cheek. "Steve, you're a good person. Regina and Angela are both lucky to have you. Just promise me you'll treat them like the treasures they truly are." I solemnly promised that they would be my first priority in life. I officially adopted Angela shortly after our wedding. Her biological father was happy to sign the transfer of parental rights. No one would ever ask him for child support again, and I was happy to become Angela's legal father. "Honey, is your grandma sick or something?" "No, why do you think so?" Just the way she spoke today. It was like she was kind of saying goodbye. She's just happy for the two of us, and now the three of us. I can't wait for her to see our beautiful baby. I'm sorry to say that 2.5 months after that, my grandmother passed away. It was sudden for us, but I think not for her. She somehow knew. They say when one door closes, another opens. I thought that our child would be the door that would open, replacing Grandma. I never expected to lose anyone from my family either. As only her new husband knows, my mother was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. She was undergoing radiation therapy, and doctors thought they had everything under control. The tumor had shrunk enough that doctors considered it possible to remove it. Why she put off the operation for so long can only be guessed at. The only reason her husband could guess was that perhaps she thought that if the operation went badly, she would never live to see her only grandchild. A few months later, the tumor returned with renewed vigor and was now inoperable. Our daughter was born on January 14th at 4 in the morning. Everyone was there, and I mean everyone, except my mother. 3 days later, I laid our newborn daughter on my mother's chest in her hospice bed. She held on as long as she could to see her granddaughter. I'm not sure she was completely herself, but her eyes told me she was enjoying this moment. The next 2 days were difficult. I spent most of my time at my mother's bedside, trying to come to terms with losing her for the second time. My father told her that he had forgiven her and still loved her, which is something I never expected to hear. The next day, her husband Dan and I watched as she stopped breathing and walked away to a life without pain or suffering. She had found religion many years ago, and the priest gave her the last rites to speed her way to heaven. 5 days after our daughter was born, we still hadn't decided on a name for her. We didn't want to just pick a name, we wanted it to be something special that we could tell her years later. The answer came to us the next day. We looked at Isabella Jane Moore sleeping in her crib, and life became good again. We could tell her about the 2 guardian angels in heaven that we named her after, who would watch over her and protect her. Both sides of the family came forward for her baptism at St. Timothy's Church. The party at my dad's house almost matched our engagement in attendance. There were 2 proud parents, 3 beaming grandparents, an enthusiastic sister, and a large extended family that would always look out for her. 3 weeks later, Dan came to our apartment. I saw that he was still grieving. We did everything possible to make him feel comfortable. Your mom went through her own personal hell after she left you and your dad. She may not have always been there, but she always loved you. You can't imagine what it was like for her when you let her come back into your life. It was like a second chance she never had. He spoke with difficulty, handing me an envelope. She wanted you to have this. I looked at Dan, then at Regina, and opened the envelope. It was a check for $75,000. It's the life insurance she took out on you through her job. I didn't know anything about it until after she was dying. Your mom said to tell you that she hopes it makes up for some of the pain she's caused you over the years. All these years, I started crying. I looked back at Dan and Regina. There's also an annuity set up for your daughter, which she will receive when she turns 18. By then, there should be enough in there to pay for her college education. Regina and I thanked him again, saying how sorry we were for his loss. Your mother and I had many good times together. I will miss her very much. All I ask is that you allow me to see your daughters from time to time. I think that seeing both girls will help me remember what I had. After he left, we just looked at each other before hugging. Looks like we'll get our dream home after all. Maybe a little later than we planned, but now the 4 of us will have a place to call home, thanks to your mother. Next week, Regina and I will celebrate our 35th wedding anniversary. 2 years after Isabella Jane was born, our son Robert came into the world. We are as happy today as we were on our wedding day. Many friends and relatives have left us, and I think about them every day. 25 years ago, my father remarried, retired after 5 years, and moved to a retirement community in Florida called Temple Gardens. We visited him once a year for the holidays, spending a week with him and his wife, Julia. On one visit several years ago, we sat on his back porch, enjoying the silence while the women prepared dinner. Dad, I was cleaning out the garage recently and found something that I thought you might want to take, since I don't need it anymore. I wrapped it up and decorated it with a huge red bow. He opened it, and when he finally saw what it was, he just looked at me and smiled. It worked, didn't it? Yeah, it worked. But I don't need it anymore. It was an equalizer he had made for me years ago. He slipped his thin hand into the belt, slammed it against his other hand, and smiled. I showed this to Robert when he was growing up. I told him the story of how I only had to use it once. I told him if he ever needed it, it would be there for him. Thank God he never had to use it. I was tough back then, but I think I've softened as I've gotten older. Dad, we all change. My father lived for many more years and finally had that conversation with my mother that he had promised her many years ago. Regina and I, well, like I said, we are happy. Every time we get ready for bed, I remember our honeymoon, the worn-out bed and the outfits she wore. She may have gained a few extra pounds over the years, but she's still my hot Latina. What do you think of our second half of the story? I think it was a bit shorter, but much more interesting, because this part was the denouement of the whole story. What do you think? Write in the comments. See you in the comments.